He was just tired of being defenseless because the city wouldn't let him have a gun.
In his world, just because you're a Southside liberal Democrat doesn't mean you need to be defenseless.
Right. Our American servicemen are being murdered where they should be the safest, on their own military base.
This is the MAC.
Welcome to Fired Up. This segment deals with a man named Otis who kind of changed our world. If you ever think that you personally can't do anything to protect the Constitution of the United States, think of Otis.
When he was 17, his mother emptied her life savings, which was out of a cookie jar, and it was $18, and she paid a stranger to drive her son from rural Louisiana to a new home in Chicago so that he could have a better life. Mr. Otis died last month at the age of 80 in a hospice facility after a long battle with cancer.
You know, he was a very compelling, very likable man with a very American story to tell. He was a family man, he was a veteran, and he was a man of principle. Not politics, but principle. And even though his politics got in the way of what he believed were his inalienable rights, he then became a hero to a lot of people and helped shaped our world.
Of course, living in Chicago, he knew that he needed to protect his home and family. And in the neighborhood he lived in, he randomly often heard gunshots, and his home was burglarized 3 times. But he was living in Chicago, which is a city that does not allow their residents to possess firearms.
Otis McDonald was the lead plaintiff in the case that eventually went to the United States Supreme Court and is now referred to as McDonald v. Chicago. It redefined the Second Amendment, it brought it into incorporation, and essentially made it an individual liberty for every American because Otis McDonald and 3 other plaintiffs were willing to fight for their right to possess a firearm in a city that didn't feel they had that right.
What happened to Mr. McDonald in 2008 was leaving for work early one morning. 3 men blocked his car in, made motions as if they had guns. He backed away and was able to get into his house, but he realized that he was just tired of being defenseless because the city wouldn't let him have a gun. So after that incident he escaped from, he became the lead plaintiff.
Well, he filed suit against the city for the right just to have a firearm. And after the Heller decision, he and those 3 other plaintiffs became the plaintiffs' core to take this last state, the last holdout. Illinois didn't have a carry scheme, last state to do that. And Chicago had, for 28 or 30 years, banned possession of handguns. So it was virtually impossible. And this is a man who'd lived his whole life in this neighborhood, worked hard, raised a family, and he couldn't defend himself in the city he loved.
Well, he was actually threatened by those 3 people. But that was only the last straw, if you will. I mean, he watched his neighborhood decline into gang-infested violence. He regularly heard gunfire outside of his house. And he saw the decline, and he saw the violence that was overtaking the streets, and simply wanted to do what every man wants to do, defend himself and defend his family.
It's not an overstatement to say that Otis McDonald and his co-plaintiffs changed the landscape of the law for everyone in the country. There are a few decisions out there where every one of us has benefited from somebody being willing to fight the fight, whether they were fighting the fight because they were maltreated by an enforcement agency, whether they were right or wrong, as in the Miranda decision, or where they were fighting for a right to exercise their civil liberties like we saw in the civil rights movement of the 60s, people willing to go out and do the hard fight. This one wasn't hailed by the media. No one followed Otis McDonald when this was going on. And in fact, you didn't see it on the news. The CBS Nightly News, the big news, I don't mean to pick on CBS, but none of them came out and said, Otis McDonald, American hero, passed away. It was in a very small core community. Every now and then he'd get a brief mention someplace outside of the gun blogs and the gun sphere.
And he wasn't a gun guy. I mean, that was another thing too. This whole situation that was turned his life around after he became noted because of this decision is when like you said, in some areas was a little bit more recognized and is more hailed. But he wasn't a gun guy per se. He was, just you said he voted with the liberal Democrat most of the time. But this is the thing that turned his life around.
Otis actually would describe himself, if asked, as a South Side Chicago liberal Democrat. And he believed in those politics and he fought for those politics. But in his world, just because you're a South Side liberal Democrat doesn't mean you need to be defenseless.
Right.
He is survived by his wife, Laura, and 4 adult children. The funeral was just held recently for him. It's so impressive to me that an individual who nobody had ever heard of was so instrumental in turning around. This was the first case where Chicago actually was forced to let people have guns for self-defense because of Otis McDonald. Godspeed, Mr. McDonald. You will be missed. You are an American hero. And we are back here on Fired Up. This panel is one of the more serious we're going to do in the next month or so. We have another case of a military base being shot up by a disjointed, something wrong with him person. And once again, our unarmed military personnel are murdered on an Army base.
Yeah, the recent Fort Hood event looks like workplace violence, but the last one was clearly a homegrown terrorist attack, and that seems to be evident to most people that look at the situation.
Well,
Well,
everybody except
with
for
the
the leaders
exception
of the government.
the president.
Yeah.
We've been having incidents now all over the country. Fort Hood, Reno, D.C., and you can label them anything you want, domestic terrorists, workplace violence, doesn't really matter. What's happening is that our American servicemen are being murdered where they should be the safest, on their own military base.
Virtually every military personnel is trained in gun safety, and even like office personnel, they still have to qualify. They do have maybe not a great deal of rifleman training, but they are competent with a firearm. So with the threat of all of the mass shootings that are going on, why are our military, I don't know what other countries, I've been to other countries and I don't think, our military bases are gun-free zones. I mean, it boggles the mind to even say that. I mean.
Well, it's entirely up to each individual administration how they handle this. They could change it if they chose. The rules right now are generally speaking that if you have a privately owned firearm and you want to have it on base, you have to register it with the base commander and then you check it into the armory. And if you want to check it out to go shoot on the range or take it someplace, you go and you draw it just like you would draw a regular firearm. If you live off base, you can have the firearm locked up in your private residence, but you can't take it onto the base without special permission. And you can't have firearms with you when you travel to the base because there's no provision to lock up those that you're bringing on a daily basis, which is, as I understand it, one of the reasons that none of the National Guardsmen who were local residents up in Reno at the Carson City Pancake House shooting, none of them could have been armed even if they'd wanted to be because they were on their way to a training duty. They couldn't take a firearm.
Right, and specifically not allowed to take their firearms with them. We're getting a lot of stuff in the press about whether these are actually terrorist attacks. The administration still doesn't seem to think that Major Hassan was a terrorist attack, or whether it's just a crazy person with a gun who should have been somewhere else in jail, or it's a criminal act. But the point is, that doesn't really matter for what we're talking about, because the way you stop any of those people is letting the victim have a gun. That's just incredible to me that we're spending all this time arguing whether this was workplace violence or not. Clearly, Major Hassan was not workplace violence. It was a terrorist attack. But whether the administration wants to see it that way or not, it doesn't matter. The reason all those guys got killed was because we wouldn't let them have guns to defend themselves against any threat.
Right, and the political agenda of this administration, of President Obama and his familiar Eric Holder, their political agenda has nothing to do with protecting the rights of the honest citizen, with protecting the lives of our own military personnel, because that isn't a concern of theirs. Their concern is simply politics, and that's what they're involved in. So it's unconscionable, the reaction of the government, the families of the victims at Fort Hood from the Major Hassan shooting have never been compensated, nor have they been even treated respectfully during this entire process. And in my opinion, it's a national shame.
It's really unfortunate because a lot of these bases, Fort Hood in particular, but a lot of military bases are actually very large towns or small cities when you get right down to it. They have their own police forces or private security police forces. And everybody that I talk to has this image of going onto a military base where you get searched and they toss your car. That really isn't the way we're doing things these days. You drive up, they look at you. If you have the right identification, they may ask you to pop the trunk depending on the installation. They're not going through every vehicle. And so it's not reasonable to believe that a motivated individual, like this individual was recently at Fort Hood, couldn't get a firearm on there. And we can't count on the police in a regular city to be standing right there. Why would they expect it to be any different on a military base?
Exactly.
It is different, because on the military base, the response time, it turns out to be greater.
Right.
The communication system isn't as good. You don't have patrol cars with trained officers driving around. But the fact that they don't secure the bases a little bit is criminal. There's no way. There is no way in the world this can happen twice at the same military base, with the shootings in D.C. at the Naval Yard in between and so forth and so on, that somebody's not responsible for this. And why, if the president is going to use executive orders to change things, he can change this like that? He's the commander-in-chief.
Well, the Commandant of the Marine Corps recently floated that proposal, and hopefully now that we've had another incident, they'll take that back up and perhaps give the men and women in the military on those bases protecting our right to have firearms to do the same.
I would be willing to bet you that under this administration, that will never happen.
Not going to take your bet, man.
No, that's a losing bet.
We're going to take some time now where you, the viewers, have written in questions for Bob here. So we're going to take some time and answer this for you. Our first question says, my friend recently had her purse stolen by a very large man who threatened to beat her if she resisted. Her concealed weapon was in the purse, but she let him have it and ran away because she was afraid she couldn't get to it fast enough to shoot him. I feel like she should have at least tried for the gun. What is the right thing to do in this situation?
Well, I'm visualizing her physical ability, her size and weight versus the guy, and what she did was the best thing to do. The gun in the purse presents some problems, and I realize that's the easy place for women to carry them, but we recommend, if possible, they carry the gun in a waist holster underneath their clothes, very similar to where guys carry them, rather than in your purse. Often the purse is the reason for the attack.
It's the target, not the person.
Yeah, it's the target, and in this case it apparently was. So if they are after your purse, you're going to lose your gun. If they are after you, if it's a rape attempt or something like that, they're going to get the purse away from you, get it out of reach so you can't use it as a club or get weapons out of it. If you can possibly carry the gun on your body somewhere, not in detachable items.
If you are involved in a self-defense shooting, do the police automatically confiscate all of your guns, your magazines, etc., or just the ones used in the shooting?
I don't know that would ever come up where the officer would know that the second gun you didn't fire. They're very likely going to take them all just to clear the area of live firearms. People will get mad after events, bad guys come back, etc. You can expect they're going to keep all your guns for a while. They may keep the one that you actually fired with longer because they're looking at evidence for the case to make sure this gun fired this bullet, etc. It's possible you get the other guns back very quickly, but I expect at the point they're going to take them all.
Is it legal to pull out my gun and show it to the bad guy to scare him away?
It is legal to point the gun for self-defense purposes to warn people off. Whether that's a good idea is sometimes questionable. If they're close enough to snatch it away from you, probably need to get more distance before you do that. If they're close enough that they could harm you and are reasonably likely to do that, they're showing you something like swinging a crowbar, you can point the gun if you think you've got time. If you don't have time, you need to fire the gun. You're dealing with a very small in-between space there where it would be appropriate to show the gun, but it can happen.
Well, that's going to end our question segment. If you have anything that you'd like to ask Bob or any of our other panelists, please write us at questions@firedupwithbob.com. Thanks for watching.
Hi, this is Tony with the Gun Store in Las Vegas. Thanks for watching Fired Up with Bob. Today's demonstration is going to be a unique firearm. This is the Mac. I'm sure you've seen the Mac in several of action movies. They're very, very popular. This is called a Mac 10. Years ago, Gordon Ingram, back in the 60s, about 1964, developed a short, compact submachine gun for what they call a PDW, a personal defense weapon, and or for clandestine operations. You can see the barrel is threaded, and they had what they call a psionic suppressor that went on the end here. A big old school style suppressor with wipes on the end and a big Nomex cover on it. And the reason for the design of this gun was for clandestine operations for the military. And he tried to sell this gun to our U.S. military, did some demos. Some of them were purchased for testing, but they were never really adopted. They went into the Mac, and this is a 9mm one. They also manufactured a .45 caliber one, and then later on they made a Mac 11, which was a little bit smaller, and it was in .380 caliber. It then developed into the M11, and if you can see, this is the comparison between the two. This is a little thicker than this one here, and they refer to these now as a Fat Mac, and this is the M11. The M11 now, this is very, very popular with competitive shooters because there's a couple companies out there that make conversion kits for this gun to slow the rate of fire down. And the reason why I'm saying that is that this has a very, very high rate of fire. These are up over almost 1,000 rounds a minute. And they're very, very difficult to hang on to. That's why this strap is here, so you don't put it in front of the muzzle. It has a collapsible stock. We're going to up here like this. It comes out like this, and you can shoot it in this configuration here. And I can tell you, it's not very comfortable. It's not very comfortable to shoot, and it is extremely fast. Other companies make it today. This gun, of course, most submachine guns fire from an open bolt, and this bolt actually encompasses around the barrel like an Uzi. That's where they got the basic idea from. It's basically sheet metal. It's all sheet metal. It has a selector over here for semi-auto fire, and the sights are non-adjustable. All you have is a fixed sight welded onto the top and a fixed peep sight back here. So they're not very accurate because of the extreme high rate of fire and the non-adjustable sights. Basically, they're a bullet hose. And if you wanted to clear out a room really quick, and I'm sure that you've seen all the action movies where the bad guys will go in with these things here and the fire and flame come out the front, that's pretty true. They can wreak a lot of havoc with this gun and put out a lot of firepower. For practical reasons, it's a fun gun to shoot, but for practicality, they didn't sell them to very many law enforcement agencies, and of course the military didn't adopt it neither. But we're going to shoot it. It comes with a double feed magazine and this is made by Cobra, which is the company. Their logo is right on it. The 45 caliber ones use basically the U.S. grease gun magazine with a slight alteration, and the M11 at 380 model made they had a their own proprietary magazine for it. Magazines were made in metal, and they were also made in plastic. So they're a fun gun to shoot. We're going to shoot this one. I'm not going to guarantee how accurate it's going to be, but it is a lot of fun. Okay, we're going to load it up and shoot it. Again, typical submachine gun, fires from an open bolt. We're going to cock it back. Going to insert the magazine, and I'm going to try and control this thing as best I can, but I'm not making any promises. So here we go. Very, very fast, very hard, and very uncomfortable. But you can see the firepower. I didn't have the magazine completely loaded either. I got a little vertical stringing there. You can start out low and then progressively get higher. Typical with a gun like this, high rate of fire. The Mac 11s or the M11s are even more difficult to control. That one's a little heavier. The Fat Mac's a little bit heavier. But very popular gun nowadays with collectors. Like I said, the shooters, for competitive shooting, it's not ideal. But with the M11s now, they make the conversion kits for them, and you can even shoot 22s out of them. So it's quite versatile, and it is a little piece of American history.
Thanks for watching us on Fired Up. We'll look forward to seeing you.